The public is basically too stupid and needs these powerful people to direct them. And we ought to be able to alternate power, just like the Whitney said, alternate power without really changing anything, which is what they're doing. And so you have basically for the last almost 50 years this alternation of power. There was one slight exception when George H.W. Bush succeeded President Reagan, but that was a special circumstance, and then Bush went out so Clinton could come and twist enough Democrat senators' arms so you get NAFTA and GATT, which is really important to the power elite. They really wanted NAFTA and GATT.
And you can see the same elitist groups, Council on Foreign Relations, Brookings, everybody having apoplectic fits over the Brexit vote in Great Britain, which is coming up because that's threatening their ideal of where they're going.
So what you had in this case was an election where you had so many people that Donald Trump, with only I think it was about 38% of the vote, could pull off a victory. 62% of Republicans voted against Trump. But if you have enough people in the field, same thing with Mitt Romney last time. Mitt Romney only got about 42% at any time. But there were about 7 or 8 people in the field, so there were so many people in the field so that he wins the nomination with a plurality rather than a majority. So Bernie Sanders, for example. Bernie Sanders represents the power elite's psychological probe of the millennials. They wanted Bernie in there to show if they had successfully persuaded enough of the younger people, millennials, to have an emotional reaction, emotional connection to Bernie's concept of a revolution and be able to accept an out-and-out socialist. Remember, Obama is a transitional stage. He's leading us to socialism as a nation, and that's what the word Nazi means, National Socialism. And so Bernie would be the next probe. How far have we conditioned this upcoming generation, the 20-something and 30-somethings, to accept outright socialism? And they're very, very pleased that so many people are accepting Bernie because he is a challenge to the, quote, Democrat establishment, which is Hillary and the big bankers and that sort of thing. Well, Trump is the same thing. He represents the outsider. Now, I know Bernie's not really an outsider, but he's presenting himself as an outsider, an alternative to the Democratic establishment of their connection with, the Saudis and the big bankers and all that sort of stuff. So on the other side, you have an outsider, Donald Trump, coming in. But what you got to remember is Donald Trump only got into this race after having a talk with Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton is the one who urged him in there. And, of course, Donald Trump gets in there, and it seems that he tries to unnecessarily aggravate a lot of people, women and so on. For example, I don't know of anybody who was against Trump, and then when he starts saying how, ugly or whatever the word is, Carly Fiorina looks like, hey, now I'm going to vote for the guy because, I'm going to vote for him because he said Carly Fiorina isn't good looking. I don't know of anybody like that. So it's totally unnecessary for him to say something like that. But he keeps doing that. Also, he'll make outrageous statements. But again, he's psychologically probing the public. So he says, all right, I want to ban all Muslims, at least till we can figure it out. Well, there's no need to say that because, you could say we need to severely limit the number of Syrian refugees, something like that. But when you say something as outlandish as I want to ban all Muslims, what you're saying is I want to ban this little 1-week-old baby whose parents had just been blown up in Syria by ISIS, and their only living relatives are the grandparents who are here. There's no way the 1-week-old baby is a terrorist. But he wants to see if the public would be willing to accept that. And so they take a poll and they show, a lot of people would accept a ban on all Muslims, which, you see, that's a probe. It's seeing the point to which Americans have been conditioned to have a visceral, emotional reaction rather than thinking something through. And that's what the power elite wants. They don't want you to think. They want you to have an emotional reaction.
Well, you have to admit it, Dennis. These are interesting times, are they not? And they always have the same shadow figures shuttling around in the background like Henry Kissinger and others trying to achieve certain goals. That the real power pulling and tugging is going on. Dr. Dennis Cuddy, my guest right now, discussing a plethora of subjects related to the power elite. We'll be back. We're at steelonsteel.com on this Memorial Day weekend. I'm John Leffler, and the program is Steel on Steel. Saul Alinsky said it doesn't work without friction. To create friction, you use the dialectic, get groups of people all mad about different things, usually mad at each other, and they can be both manipulated. Both groups can be manipulated to a third destination. Most people don't even suspect. Welcome back to Steel on Steel. John Leffler here with you. Dr. Dennis Cuddy, my guest right now. Really, all of this stuff, all of these little issues that we have, they're just used to propel us along this continuum in which we find ourselves.
Yeah, that's what they use. There's the chaos theory and there's order ab chaos, order out of chaos. So they create a lot of chaos, and then out of the chaos, they'll create coercive situations, whether it's 9/11 and the public, says we value our freedom, and the very afternoon of 9/11, two-thirds of the people say we'll give up some of our freedoms for, security and so forth. So they want to see to what extent they can do that, and they have to, like the concept of perpetual war for perpetual peace. You keep things stirred up enough and keep people animosity with each other. And they've used that. Years ago, it was Catholics against Protestants in Europe. Since 600, they've used it as Sunnis against Shia, Jews against Arabs, and so forth. They like to create that sense of conflict because only then do people become coercible. For example, if the Israelis were just left to their own devices, they could manage like that. But what they do is they try to create pressure, points at Israel. Israel is heavily dependent on foreign loans and foreign investments. And so what they'll do is like create a sort of economic pressure to persuade Israel to not react. Israel would love to bomb Iran, but the U.S. has said, no, we might have certain problems with that. And so they apply economic pressure all over the place to get people to do things. And then there's a lot of cover-ups, too. There's a whole lot of cover-up going on in various fields. And like the other day, you had a good program with Sybil Edmonds on, really enlightening people about the shenanigans that we had been up to in our foreign policy across the world. A lot of people don't realize that Saddam Hussein was a CIA assassin protected by us. His assignment was to assassinate the Prime Minister of Iraq for us back in 1959. And so we put these people into place, and we take them out, and we cover stuff up, and we overthrow governments, and we act hypocritically. And there's a fellow, L. Fletcher Prouty is his name, and he was head of the Special Operations for the Joint Chiefs of Staff back during the Kennedy years.
Yeah, I remember that.
And he actually said there's a group of people who get the same information as the NSA, CIA. They're not members of the government. They're separate. And he literally says, and I use this quote, he says they can literally make and break countries around the world at will. This separate group of people, he says, I call them the power elite. And he frankly just admitted it.
Okay, well, let's bring this down to a so what. Where is all this heading? Because it seems like we have really big changes ahead of us that are approaching rapidly, and it's coming much faster than it did when you and I first started, let's use the word dialoguing 25 years ago.
Right. What I think we can do, what I try to do, is since these powerful people in control of the means of communication, the media, the press, and so forth, they've literally bought up certain presses and they control them. This is all in the Cecil Rhodes documents and J.P. Morgan and Congressional Record if you go back far enough. I try and point out, for example, the hypocrisy. For example, I just had an article on News with Views a couple of days ago titled Hillary and Media Hypocrisy, where I point out that while the media is talking about all of the past activities of question of Donald Trump or Ted Cruz or Ben Carson or whatever, they deliberately do not tell people about similar things with Hillary, like Hillary being co-editor of the Yale Review, and in there it was laced with cartoons showing police as pigs and dismembered, and also Hillary would defend the Black Panthers when they took a black man, Alan Rackley, and literally burned him with cigarettes and boiled him with boiling water and clubbed him and ice-picked him and then shot him in the head twice. And here is Hillary defending that. But the media won't bring that up. So I point out the media hypocrisy. I point out the hypocrisy since Bill Clinton's being promoted now in this race. I point out the hypocrisy of Bill Clinton taking an oath to uphold and defend the Constitution, but I have a letter from him in 1993 where he's saying he supports a world federal government, which you're not supposed to do. So we point out the hypocrisy, and then what we have to do is try to reverse this trend that the power elite wants you to just have emotional reactions rather than thinking. Back in the 60s, they would say, what do you think about this? Now they ask me, well, how do you feel about this? So what we need to do is reverse that trend. You reverse it by showing the hypocrisy, personalize it. You appeal to people's pride. You have to stop them in their tracks when they have this emotional reaction and appeal to their pride, show the hypocrisy of the other side, and get them to start to think again. Because what happens is when you have emotional reactions, which is what Orwell said in Big Brother, his agent says we will quicken the tempo of human life. That makes everything focused on the now, immediate gratification. You make them become, like Aldous Huxley said, a mindless state of subhumanity, which is where we're going, which is primitive, it's animalistic, and that's what they want because animals can be, conditioned to respond. So like Pavlov's dog, you want to back that process up by forcing them to stop in their tracks and then start to think again. And if we can get them only to start thinking again, we actually have logic on our side. If people would use their logical abilities, they will see the fallacies of Hillary Clinton or the left or the people who are trying to condition them. So, for example, now they believe that they have created an emotional order. They've overturned the old moral order. The hippies, free love, what's in it for me, look out for number one. And now they've progressed to let's attack even deeper. So Fox has a show Lucifer on. Fox also has a show Border Town where the Virgin Mary mugs Jesus, takes his money, gives him a male pattern baldness, all this really, really bad stuff. What you do is say, why are you laughing at this? You ask a question. You don't tell them. You don't say, hey, you stupid idiot, you're having an emotional reaction and you're a dummy, and you don't insult them. You want to appeal to their pride. You ask them a question because that forces somebody to think. If you just attack somebody, they'll have an emotional reaction. If you call them an idiot, that'll make them have an emotional reaction. See, that's what Trump's doing. He calls you, hey, you're stupid, you're fired. That makes them have an emotional reaction. What we want to do is not have them have an emotional reaction. You want to have them think. So you don't challenge them directly. You ask them a question. Whenever you ask somebody a question, it forces them. It literally forces them to start thinking. So you start with a question saying, why do you tolerate this insult? Why do you accept the unnecessary extremity of this view? And for instance, like the person of a 5-year-old in the bathroom with a male child molester. Or you point out, so you would even exclude the 1-week-old Muslim baby from going to be with his grandparents. And all of a sudden they come to a screeching halt. They say, well, wait a minute, maybe I shouldn't do that. So you've started them to reverse this process. You're now starting them to start to think. You appeal to the pride, then you use examples that personalize it, make it like they're making the decision, and you point out the hypocrisy of the other side. And once you get them to start to think, we actually have logic on our side because socialism doesn't work. And the way you do that, the example I use about socialism is the emotional reaction is, oh, look, the socialist is helping the poor, the evil capitalist is not. What I do with that situation, I said, okay, 2 people have $5,000. I use like a biblical analogy. You got $5,000, and you have a process where you invest it and you double your money. All right, so the capitalist and the socialists have $5,000. They invest their money and they double it. So they got $10,000. They gain $5,000 each. The capitalist contributes $4,000 of the $5,000 to the poor. He keeps $1,000 profit for himself. He now has $6,000. The socialist gets $5,000. He gives all $5,000 to the poor. All right, and I ask a question. I don't challenge him. I ask a question. Who will wind up, we'll do this 5 times, who will wind up giving more money to the poor? Now, the immediate emotional reaction is, oh, well, the socialist is. See, he gave all of his profit to the poor.
No, I know where this is going.
And then you get this opportunity to explain that, how the $6,000 he invests doubles at $12,000, and so forth and so on. So in the end, the socialist is given $25,000 to the poor, 5-step process, but the capitalist is given $30,000 to the poor. So when you do that, we have at least a chance of reversing the process of people simply reacting emotionally. Now, that's very important, not only for changing the moral order, but economically, too.
I think that's the whole issue, is to reverse the process and to actually make them think. And it's for anybody who's been conditioned into that collective consensus that comes out of public education, it's pretty easy to do that if you do it the right way.
That's right. Yeah, you start with a question. You don't call them stupid right off the bat.
Anyway, Dr. Dennis Cuddy, and I know you've authored a lot of books. I don't know if you have any particular one you're promoting right now, but your views appear at newswithviews.com. Anything else we haven't hit here?